Hello and welcome to Livewire Markets. My name is Chris Conway. Today I am joined by Andrew McKee from Elston Asset Management. Andrew co-founded Elston in 2008 and has more than 25 years of experience in Australian equities portfolio construction and management. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciate the invitation for being here.
Most welcome. Can you talk a little bit about the team at Elston, how you came together and how you collectively think about markets?
When we really developed the strategy, we wanted a team-based approach. Few reasons for that. Firstly, as investors, we all have biases, cognitive and emotional biases that can affect our decision making when it comes to money, and we wanted to round that out with a team approach. Also, we think that it leads to more objective assessment of ideas. You get challenged in that team environment than you would otherwise in maybe a more hierarchical structure. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you do see even sector dominance as well, where one PM might have responsibility for banks and then dominates the view on banks all the time and needs to talk about banks all the time. And we think having a broader collective decision-making process across sectors adds value to investors and advisors longer term. And then probably lastly, we've seen the key person risk. We've seen a lot of that recently, where if there is that hierarchical structure, it can create significant risk for the underlying investors, the advisors, the institutions using that particular product, in that a lot of the IP sits with that individual. If you lose that individual, how does that affect the sustainability of the strategy, sustainability of the actual product for the investors as well? So key consideration when we first developed the business and the strategy was to have a team-based approach for those reasons.
What are two or three key elements, Andrew, of the Elston investment process and how do they contribute to your performance?
Yeah, again, going back to the start, we wanted to specialise in large cap. So I think a key component of our competitive advantage is that specialisation in ASX100. For us, a lot of our competitors in large cap drift into the 200 and sometimes even into the 300. And our view is that it's very difficult to understand those businesses well. We find it hard enough to know the 100 well. And why we do that is that there is a bias we all tend to have, which we focus on the businesses we own already and we know them intimately, but your next best idea comes from the business that you don't own. So you have to be across those in order to generate good idea development. And we would challenge those other managers who are drifting in that 200 businesses, 300 businesses owned to be able to know them well. Mm-hmm. So that's our view, and I think that's been a key plank of our competitive advantage going forward. I think definitely the concentration in the index as well actually plays to our advantage. There's a lot of views out there that potentially large cap companies, you can't outperform the index. A lot of institutions, a lot of advisors and investors use passive for that large cap exposure and then maybe add a little bit of high alpha opportunities and mid caps and things around that. But our view is that the concentration in our market provides opportunity. It's significant risk for investors, but also provides opportunity for us. 48% of the index is in the top 10 companies, 52% of the index in materials and financials. So outside of that, there's a big opportunity set for us to outperform over the sort of 5-year plus. So I think ironically, the risk in the index, the lack of diversity in the index, although you need to manage that risk, creates significant opportunity for us to outperform over the long term. The third element was definitely in terms of developing some sort of value proposition for investors and advisors to use us. Mm-hmm. Because we are large cap, we have a high capacity strategy, and our view is that we could grow into that capacity over time, so we priced accordingly for that. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are selecting passive, which is low cost, and that's, we think, valid for some markets, but it's not valid for the Australian market given those concentration risks. It's not a diversified index, and so we would challenge that idea as well. You also limit your opportunity to generate alpha over the long term, and there's an opportunity cost for that. So we have generated 1.5% after fees over 10 years compounding in alpha in that strategy, just doing large cap. And if you like, that's a 1.5% MER when you're just going passive, because you give up that opportunity for outperformance. Having said that, I think also active managers are potentially too expensive. And we do have a competitive advantage. If we're, say, half a basis points cheaper than the average active manager because of our scale, it's easier for us to generate 0.5% alpha against our competitors every year by being low cost.
Yeah.
So that's our value equation, managing the risk in the index, giving the opportunity for outperformance of alpha through time, and being low cost. So in combination, that's, we would argue, a very powerful value proposition for investors and advisors.
I wanted to ask you about the tolerances in the portfolio. So the positions that you can take, I believe 6.5% at the maximum in terms of the position in the portfolio.
Yep.
And the lower end is at 2.5%, I believe.
Yes.
Can you just explain the justification for that and how that helps with portfolio balance and stock selection?
Yep. We have a fixed weighted methodology. So we don't use tracking error in terms of portfolio construction. Our views on why have fixed weighted is that if you're following a tracking error approach, it does lead to some buy high, sell low activity in the portfolio where you're, a relative performance of BHP, you're forced to buy it when it's doing well, you're forced to sell it when it's not doing so well. And we think that that's counterintuitive to investing. That's why we use the fixed weighted, but we're worried about being wrong. So we limit the amount that we can invest in one business at 6.5%. Equally, we want to outperform over the longer term, and a 2.5% minimum weighting is actually bigger than the top 10.
Yeah.
Once you get into the 11th company in Australia, that's actually quite an active bet against the index. So it gives us the longer term opportunity to outperform, generate hopefully alpha for investors, but make sure that we're managing risk, not concentrating the portfolio too much, adding sufficient diversity within the portfolio, and that's the reason we went through that process.
The fund is style agnostic, and in the past you've shown a willingness to focus on both growth and value. Given where the market sits today, where on that spectrum does the portfolio currently sit? Is it more towards the growth end or more towards the value end?
Before I get to the second part, I'll just answer the first part, which is why we're style neutral in the first place.
Yep.
Our view is that those styles go through periods of relative outperformance, and we wanted to give investors a smoother ride over time, not having a particular bias in the portfolio construction, having flexibility to be able to select securities and businesses based on their merits rather than a particular style. So if we wanted a growth business, we're happy to buy those growthy type names. We just don't want to overpay for those businesses. We don't want to buy a value business because you're a value biased manager and end up in a value trap where there's no pathway to sustainable shareholder value creation. So those biases also affect your stock selection. And we think that businesses should be treated on their own merits and selected on that basis. Having said that, that means you do get relative opportunities, and you will see some skew in the portfolio through time, some drift. Yep. Where it may look more value-y, it may look more growthy, depending on the relative valuations of those businesses. And what I would have said the last 12 to 18 months, that drift has occurred, and we're gradually building up our more typical growth type names. Mm-hmm. And we think that's a thematic that's still to play out over the next 12 months, 2 years.
So it's fair to say that the portfolio will take perhaps a more growth tilt as we move forward in time, and previously it was more value.
Yeah, we think what's driven the derating of growth is the question, mm-hmm. and what's driven that is predominantly risk-free rates going up, which is obviously on the back of inflation, and we don't see that necessarily reversing out in the short term. So that pressure on valuation for growth businesses will be there, and if we also think of the earnings, some of those businesses have been funded through cheap liquidity. They've been able to sustain fairly strong earnings growth from COVID stimulation and the like. And so there might be a bit of pressure on the earnings front as well as sustained pressure on valuations. And in combination, we think that will present opportunities for us to acquire some of those quality businesses.
Great, let's dive in and talk a little bit more about quality businesses. I know that the Lottery Corporation is a stock that you have held and are still holding. Mm-hmm. It had quite a good reporting season. Can you take us through the thesis there? Yep. And then maybe some opportunities that you're thinking or you're running the ruler over now?
Yeah, I think Lottery Corporation ticks a number of boxes for us in terms of portfolio construction that we wanted coming out of COVID. We wanted pricing power, we wanted dominant market position, which really goes to sustainability of margins in a rising cost environment as well as a potentially slowing GDP environment. We wanted the ability of companies to transition their business over time, if you like, use digital to become more efficient and grow shareholder wealth through time. And if we do go into a more challenged GDP environment, we'd like more defensive earnings coming into that. And so Lottery Corporation really ticked most of those boxes. You know, they have very defensive earnings, they're monopolistic, they have pricing power, they have digital transition to improve margins over time. And so that was one of the reasons we selected it in the context of broader portfolio construction. And you know, they had a good result that demonstrated a number of those factors.
Great. And then some of the opportunities that you're looking at the moment and out into the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, for us, moving maybe the portfolio slightly towards earnings momentum based businesses. So we've spoken previously about pricing power, market share, but earnings momentum. So what is the trajectory of earnings over the next 3 to 5 years? Because we think if we are going to a tougher economic environment, we want businesses that can sustain reasonably strong earnings growth, and we think that will be a driver for our performance. It has been in the past, and we think that will be the case in the future. And it's coming into a more challenging environment for business to be able to navigate that. So earnings momentum, we think, will be highly valued and prized in the market.
Yeah.
So an example of a business we've only recently added is car sales. So car sales, obviously dominant market position here in Australia, pricing power, all those things we've spoken about earlier. But have made a significant acquisition in Trader Interactive in the US. And they have also further international divisions as well. We think that they can take the learnings from Australia and apply it to those businesses to improve the operational performance of those businesses. And they've looked for businesses that are dominant in their market as well, but maybe not as well developed. So on the back of that acquisition, on the back of potentially some thematic benefits from a slowing new car, used car environment, actually benefits car sales. So you've got a top-down benefit, you've got the acquisition. We look at that 3 to 5 year earnings trajectory, and it's very strong for that business. So although you are paying up for something like car sales, that it is a more traditional growth business, we think that's justified in terms of the return on capital and the earnings outlook for that business.
Just on car sales, I'm sure you're familiar with when they did that takeover, it was in 2 tranches. So they bought half the business initially and then sort of ran the ruler over it and understood how it operated. And then they've since purchased the other half. Is that a strategy that you like and were happy to see employed?
I think it's a great question, Chris. I think it goes to management execution. So, execution of strategy specifically. What is the strategy? What's the track record of management's ability to execute as well? The strategy is one thing, but if you can't execute on that, it's nothing. And so they have done that in the past, and they've had a similar approach to doing that. And it's a good way in terms of hedging out your risk of an acquisition, getting to know that business, getting to know the management in that business, and then deciding to use shareholders' capital wisely at the time to take 100% ownership when you understand it. And because they've done that in the past, it gives us confidence they're going to execute that in the future. So I think part of our work that we do is very, very much from a business owner's perspective, understanding management, understanding their ability to formulate strategy and effectively execute. And I think that's a really good example of that.
If you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, make sure to give it a like. And don't forget to follow our YouTube channel because we're adding great new content every week.